Have you ever shared something with your family, only to wish you could take it all back? Things you thought would help them understand you better, but instead, it changed how they saw you forever? Well, after 65, there are 5 things you should never say to your family. And trust me, you'll regret it if you do. Let's explore why these conversations should remain unsaid. If this is your first time here, welcome to Flame of Wisdom. This is a place where we explore meaningful stories, share practical insights, and learn together. If you find value in what we're discussing, I'd love you to join our growing community. Take a moment to like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. 1. Past major mistakes. We all have a past full of experiences, some good, others, not so much. As we grow older, it's tempting to share our regrets or lessons learned from those mistakes. But sometimes, keeping these stories to ourselves is the wisest choice. Think about it. How would you feel if your adult children or grandchildren looked at you with pity instead of respect? Mrs. Helen, a retired school teacher in her 70s, was always open about her past. She shared stories of her youthful mistakes in business, her financial struggles, and even her past relationships. Mrs. Helen believed that by being honest about her struggles, she could pass on lessons to her children. She thought it would give them a clear view of the choices she made, and hopefully, they'd avoid similar mistakes. But what she didn't realize was the emotional toll this would take on her children. As Mrs. Helen continued to share her past with her kids, her children began to see her less as the independent, strong woman they had always admired and more as someone who had made poor decisions. The more she shared, the more they started to worry about her judgment. What they heard weren't just lessons from her past, they heard about regrets and failures that made them feel sorry for her. They began to see her differently. It wasn't about the lessons anymore. It was about their own feelings of regret and pity for her. They saw her as a woman who had failed, someone who had stumbled along the way. They no longer saw her as the resilient figure who had raised them but as a person defined by past mistakes. And the more Mrs. Helen tried to explain, the more she felt misunderstood. What she didn't know was that sometimes, silence about our mistakes is the best gift we can give. Sharing the wisdom we've gained from those mistakes is helpful, but sharing every painful detail can sometimes leave others with a sense of sorrow or regret for us. It can change how they see us and, in turn, weaken the respect they have for us. By keeping some parts of our story to ourselves, we protect our dignity and the way our family sees us. When we keep our mistakes private, we offer only the lessons we've learned, not the burden of our failures. Mrs. Helen could have shared the wisdom she gained without revealing every detail of her struggles. Sometimes, it's the things we choose not to share that preserve our integrity and our family's respect. 2. Minor health concerns. We all experience health issues as we age, from minor aches to the occasional sleepless night. But too often, we burden our loved ones with every small discomfort, not realizing the emotional toll it takes on them. Sometimes, we talk about our health so much that it starts to overshadow the way our family sees us. Mr. David, a sprightly 68-year-old man, had always been in perfect health. He had always been the strong, dependable father, the one who never needed help. But recently, he began noticing small aches in his knees and back. Nothing major, just the normal wear and tear of aging. At first, he mentioned them casually to his daughter, just trying to keep her updated on how he was doing. She listened, of course, but soon, her concern began to take over. She began treating him like he was fragile. She constantly suggested doctor visits, diets, supplements, anything to fix the small issues he was facing. Mr. David didn't mind at first. After all, she was his daughter, and she only wanted the best for him. But as time went on, he noticed how her concern started to feel more like pity. The more he shared, the more his daughter checked in on him. Soon, it wasn't just about his knees or back anymore, it was about his overall health. Mr. David realized that his daughter was beginning to worry about him more than she needed to. It wasn't making him feel better. It was making him feel like a burden. What Mr. David didn't realize was that by focusing so much on his minor aches, he had unintentionally made his daughter see him as weak. He became the center of her worry, and that wasn't what he wanted. So, Mr. David shifted the dynamic. Instead of talking about every minor health issue, he began to focus on the positive aspects of life. He shared how much he enjoyed his daily walks, how he still found joy in his favorite hobbies, and how he was enjoying a new book. He stopped letting the aches define him. Over time, his daughter stopped treating him as fragile. She saw him not as a person with health problems, but as a strong, resilient man who could still enjoy life. The lesson here is clear: sharing every minor health concern with your family can often create more stress than it alleviates. If you focus on the positive aspects of your life, you help your family see you for who you truly are, not for the aches and pains you face. By sharing what brings you joy, you show them your strength and resilience, rather than making them worry about every discomfort. Sometimes, it's better to keep the minor things to yourself, for their peace of mind. And for your own. 3. Unfulfilled dreams or wishes. We all have dreams that never came to fruition, whether it's a career we didn't pursue or a trip we never took. While these dreams are precious, sharing them openly with family can sometimes cast a shadow on your relationships. It's natural to reflect on what could have been, to long for the opportunities you missed. But sometimes, sharing these unfulfilled dreams with the ones closest to us can unintentionally make them feel weighed down by our regrets. Take Mr. Walter, for example. He was a retired engineer who had always dreamed of traveling the world. He spent decades building his career, working hard to provide for his family, and he never had the chance to travel as he had hoped. As he neared 70, his health and energy weren't what they used to be, and the dream of traveling felt more distant with each passing year. One day, his grandson, who was planning his own big adventure, was sitting with him. Mr. Walter saw this as an opportunity to share his dream with the young man. He thought that telling his grandson about his own unfulfilled dream would be an inspiring conversation, a way to pass on his love of adventure and travel. But when Mr. Walter shared this story, his grandson didn't respond with excitement or inspiration. Instead, his grandson felt sorry for him. What Mr. Walter didn't expect was that by sharing his unachieved dream, he had unintentionally made his grandson feel guilty. His grandson, excited for his upcoming travels, couldn't shake the feeling that his grandfather had missed out on something he would never get to do. The conversation wasn't about Mr. Walter's dream, it became about the guilt and sadness it caused his grandson. Mr. Walter didn't realize how his words had cast a shadow over the excitement his grandson had for his own journey. Mr. Walter quickly recognized the impact his story had on his grandson. His intention wasn't to make him feel bad, but that was the effect. The dream he had spent a lifetime wishing to fulfill suddenly became something that weighed heavily on his grandson's shoulders. Instead of sharing his dream to inspire, he had instead caused pain. The lesson here is clear. Sometimes, keeping those unfulfilled dreams to yourself helps protect the joy of your loved ones. Sharing the lessons you learned along the way, stories of perseverance, resilience, and finding happiness in unexpected places, can be far more valuable than sharing the dream itself. We all carry our unfulfilled wishes with us, but the impact they have on others isn't always what we expect. When we keep those dreams quietly within, we spare our family from feeling burdened by our regrets. Instead of focusing on what was never achieved, we can show them how to find meaning and fulfillment in the present, regardless of past unfulfilled dreams. 4. Disappointments with family. As parents and grandparents, we naturally have hopes and expectations for our family. We want the best for them, and we often have an image of how their lives should unfold. But there are times when we feel disappointed by the choices they make. These choices may not align with what we would have hoped for them, or they might be steps in a direction we don't fully understand. It's in these moments, when disappointment begins to rise, that it's important to pause and think carefully before speaking. Instead of expressing that disappointment, it might be better to keep it to ourselves. Take Mrs. Laura, for instance. Mrs. Laura was a former nurse, and for years, she had imagined that her daughter would take after her and pursue a career in healthcare. She had worked in the medical field for decades, helping people and finding great satisfaction in her work. She hoped her daughter would follow in her footsteps, become a nurse or a doctor, and have the same kind of stability and fulfillment that she had enjoyed. But when her daughter chose to pursue a career in the arts instead, Mrs. Laura felt torn. She didn't understand the choice. The arts seemed risky and uncertain. She was concerned that her daughter might struggle financially, and she worried about her future. She had spent years seeing the stability of healthcare, and now, she faced a reality where her daughter was pursuing something entirely different. One day, Mrs. Laura couldn't hold back her feelings any longer. She expressed her disappointment to her daughter, suggesting that a more stable career in healthcare would be a better choice. She hoped to help her daughter see what she felt was the best path for her. But instead of receiving the advice with gratitude, Mrs. Laura's daughter felt judged. Her daughter, who had always respected her mother's opinions, now felt as if her mother didn't believe in her choice. She felt that her mother didn't trust her to make her own decisions. It wasn't about Mrs. Laura's concerns, it was about how her daughter interpreted them. What Mrs. Laura had meant as loving concern became a barrier between them. Her daughter began to feel as though her mother didn't approve of her. It wasn't the supportive conversation that Mrs. Laura had hoped for. It became something that strained their relationship. Mrs. Laura quickly realized that her words had created a wall between them. The disappointment she felt was not necessarily wrong, but expressing it in the way she did caused her daughter to question her abilities, her choices, and her worth. In that moment, Mrs. Laura recognized the power of silence. Sometimes, the most supportive thing we can do is to keep our disappointment to ourselves and show our trust instead. By choosing silence in the face of our family's choices, we allow them to grow and make their own decisions without the weight of our judgment. 5. Personal plans for assets and inheritance. It's natural to want to share our plans for the future, especially when it comes to our assets. After all, we work hard throughout our lives to provide for the ones we love. We want to make sure our families are taken care of when we're gone. But there's a big difference between making sure your family knows your wishes and disclosing everything too soon. If you share every detail too early, you risk misunderstandings and unnecessary conflict. You may be trying to create peace, but instead, you could be inviting tension and division. Mr. Albert, a retired financial advisor, spent years building a modest estate for his family. He worked hard, planning for his family's future, and felt confident that he had made wise decisions. He was proud of the estate he had accumulated, knowing it would provide his children with financial security. After years of working, saving, and planning, Mr. Albert finally felt ready to share his plans for how his assets would be divided among his children. He thought sharing this information would provide reassurance, a sense of comfort. He wanted his children to know they were all taken care of and that there would be no confusion when the time came. He believed that telling them exactly how he intended to divide his assets would give them a sense of security and clarity. But when Mr. Albert shared his plans, the reaction was not what he expected. Instead of feeling reassured or relieved, his children began to argue over the details. They questioned his choices, suggested changes, and, to his surprise, started pushing for more. What was supposed to be a discussion of peace and security quickly turned into a heated argument. Mr. Albert found himself in the middle of a family dispute, one that he never imagined would happen. He thought he was protecting his family by being open, but in doing so, he had turned a private matter into a point of contention. The more Mr. Albert tried to explain his reasoning behind each decision, the more his children began to nitpick. They didn't focus on the fact that he had taken the time to plan for their future. Instead, they focused on the details they didn't agree with, and it became less about the love and security he had hoped to provide, and more about how much each child could get. What was meant to be a thoughtful conversation about inheritance became a bitter disagreement. Mr. Albert quickly realized that by discussing his plans too early, he had opened the door to tension. He hadn't expected this conflict, but it was clear now that he should have waited. In his desire to provide reassurance, he had unintentionally created more stress for his family. The issue of inheritance, which should have been a moment of peace, had instead become an emotional and financial battle. The lesson here is simple: keeping your plans private until the right moment can preserve family harmony. There is no need to share every detail, especially if doing so creates conflict or confusion. It's important to focus on relationships, not resources. Instead of emphasizing money or assets, it's better to share your values, your wisdom, and the lessons you've learned throughout your life. Whether it's past mistakes, health concerns, unfulfilled dreams, disappointments, or plans for the future, choosing silence isn't about hiding the truth, it's about protecting the peace and respect within your family. Silence can be a powerful tool, one that allows relationships to grow without unnecessary strain. By holding back on some topics, we protect not only our own dignity but also the harmony and love that binds our families together. If you found these insights valuable, give this video a like and subscribe. Share it with someone who might need to hear this advice. And in the comments section, let us know if there's something you've kept private for the benefit of your family's peace. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes silence truly is golden.